In the ancient world, putting your body into a chair wasn't just about taking a load off your feet. It was an act of war.
Yeah, or an absolute assertion of dominance.
Right. And strangely enough, it was the legal mechanism for marrying your spouse. Welcome to Reformed Thinking. I am your host. And if you are listening to this right now, maybe you are commuting to work, maybe you are doing dishes, or
Or maybe you are actually sitting down right now. I am the resident expert here, and that physical action of sitting is the entire focal point of our deep dive today.
it really is. We are going to look at a massive stack of lexical data, linguistic notes, and theological dictionaries. And they all focus on a single Hebrew root, which is yashab, along with its conceptual counterpart, shakan.
And you might be wondering why you should care about ancient verbs.
Oh, I get it. I mean, grammar doesn't always sound thrilling. But a single Hebrew word for putting your body in a chair unfolds into these massive theological concepts regarding action, rest, divine sovereignty, and, what it means to truly inhabit a space.
Yes, it dictates how we view human authority and, even bigger than that, how we understand God's absolute reign over the cosmos.
Spot on. So to set the stage for you, the listener, we are looking at a verb, yashab, that is used over 1,000 times in the Old Testament.
And when a word shows up that frequently, it stops being a simple vocabulary term. It becomes an entire cultural lens.
Right.
The lexicons and the theological word books we are drawing from today break down its usage across hundreds of texts. We are going to look at its basic physical mechanics, its odd cultural idioms, and the way it changes meaning through different grammatical forms.
Plus, the striking ways it defines the eternal decrees of God. Because the ancient Near Eastern mind did not separate the physical body from spiritual realities.
No, not at all. What you did with your knees, your hips, and your posture communicated volumes about your status in the universe.
I love that concept so much, the idea that theology is not just floating in the clouds, but it is tied to our physical bones and muscles. So we have to start with the physical mechanics, like the most literal translation. Let's look at the basic posture. What is the fundamental action happening when an ancient Hebrew speaker uses this word?
The most basic translation of yashab in its simplest active form is to sit or sit down.
Okay.
Hebrew grammar refers to this as the qual stem, which just means the naked, unadorned action of the verb. We have very concrete examples of this bodily posture throughout the historical narratives. Take Genesis 27.1 time.
Oh, the scene with Jacob and Isaac.
Yeah, that is the famous scene where Jacob is tricking his blind, aging father, Isaac, into giving him the blessing. Jacob brings in the wild game he prepared, and he tells his father to arise and sit so he can eat.
So the text is describing the literal physical exertion of an old man, lifting his torso and taking a seated posture on his bed.
Yes, the word captures the physical weight of the body resting on a surface.
That makes complete sense. It is the literal bending of the knees and taking a seat. And then you have Exodus 17.12, which gives us an incredibly vivid picture.
Right, the battle against the Amalekites.
Yeah. Moses is up on the hill, and as long as he holds up the staff of God, the Israelites are winning. But his arms grow heavy. The battle drags on for hours under the harsh desert sun.
And the text says Aaron and Hur took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it.
Right, Yashav. The physical toll of the battle literally forces him into this posture. His body is giving out, and the stone provides a place for his weight to rest.
That scene in Exodus is a perfect baseline for understanding the physical reality of the word. Sitting is the cessation of walking, running, or standing. And from that very simple biological reality, the ancient mind began to extract larger concepts.
Like what?
Well, think about what happens when you sit. You stop moving, you become fixed in a location, your center of gravity drops, making you harder to move.
Oh, that brings up an analogy I think works really well here. Think about a corporate boardroom.
Okay, go on.
If you are standing up at a meeting in a corporate boardroom, it implies a few things. You might be at the whiteboard presenting something, which means you are working.
Right, you are active.
Yeah, or maybe you have your coat on and you are about to leave the room. You are in motion. But taking a seat, especially pulling out the large leather chair at the head of the table,
That establishes your place.
yes, it grounds you in that room. When the CEO walks in, everyone might stand out of respect, but the meeting does not officially begin until the CEO sits down. The posture of sitting becomes synonymous with being in charge.
That analogy connects perfectly to the lexical data, actually. The text regularly applies yashab to judges and kings. It is no accident that taking a seat is linked to rulership in the ancient Near East.
So they use it for royal courts.
Yes, Psalm 9.5 talks about presiding at court, stating that the Lord sits on his throne judging righteously. But we also see it applied to human kings. Look at the intense political drama in 1 Kings chapter 1.
Oh, with David's succession.
Yeah, King David is on his deathbed, and there is a massive dispute over who will succeed him. Adonijah tries to usurp the crown, but David commands that Solomon be anointed.
Right.
The climax of that entire political crisis is in verse 46, which says, Solomon sits on the royal throne. The crisis is over the moment his body hits the seat.
Wow.
And in Isaiah 10:13, the phrase, those who sit, functions as a direct synonym for kings. The physical posture is the visual representation of active, unchallenged rule.
Okay, hold on. This is where I have to ask a question because we are painting a very regal picture here. Does the physical act of sitting in the ancient Near East always imply authority?
What do you mean?
Well, is the word highly context dependent? Because going back to Moses sitting on a rock in Exodus 17, that sounds a lot more like sheer physical exhaustion than royal authority.
Oh, that's right.
I mean, he is practically collapsing on that stone, and you have people sitting in mourning or sitting in the dirt. It cannot always mean you are the CEO of the ancient world.
That is a crucial distinction. The context entirely dictates the weight of the word. Sitting can indicate royal authority, but the lexicons also show it designates the simple opposite of standing or walking. It is a description of a state of rest.
So just being still.
Yes.
Yeah.
Psalm 139.2 captures this beautifully. You know, when I sit and when I rise, the psalmist is describing the totality of human movement. God knows the moments of stillness and the moments of action.
Okay, that clarifies things.
Furthermore, if you look at cognate languages related to ancient Hebrew, like Akkadian and Arabic, the root can mean anything from sitting to dwelling to even jumping or leaping in certain obscure dialects.
Wait, really? Jumping?
Yeah, linguistic drift is funny like that. But in biblical Hebrew, it settles firmly into sitting and staying. So it is the opposite of motion.
Got it.
That stillness can mean utter exhaustion, like Moses on the rock. It can mean grief, like Job sitting in the ashes. Or it can mean supreme authority, like Solomon on the throne. The physical action is the same, but the surrounding narrative provides the meaning.
You know, if you sit in a chair long enough, you are no longer just resting, you are staying. Like if I go to a coffee shop and sit for 5 minutes, I am taking a break.
Right.
But if I sit there for 8 hours with my laptop, I am occupying the space. That physical reality leads precisely into the next major definition of yashab in our stack of research, which is to remain, stay, or dwell.
The progression from posture to geography is completely logical. Yashav moves from bending the knees to planting a flag in the dirt.
Yeah.
When we look at the patriarchal narratives in Genesis, this shift becomes very clear. In Genesis 13:12, the text describes the separation of Abraham and Lot. Their flocks are too large to stay together.
So they have to split up.
Right. Abraham stays in the land of Canaan, but the text says Lot sat among the cities of the valley and moved his tent as far as Sodom. Our English Bibles usually translate this as settled or dwelled, but the Hebrew verb is yashab.
So you took a seat in the region.
Exactly. I mean, spot on. Genesis 24.55 uses it to describe a person remaining with a family for a period of time. Eventually, the active participle of the verb, jorb, becomes the standard noun for inhabitant or dweller. The one who sits in the land is the one who inhabits it.
That makes me think about the transition from a nomadic lifestyle to a settled lifestyle. The patriarchs were wanderers. They lived in tents, moving their flocks from pasture to pasture based on the seasons and the rainfall.
Right. They were always mobile.
They were constantly standing, walking, migrating. So to finally yarb in a land to sit down geographically must have been a massive cultural shift. It means building stone houses instead of pitching tents.
It means planting crops instead of just following herds.
Yeah, it is a total change in how you interact with the earth under your feet.
It is a complete reorganization of society, and the Hebrew grammar reflects the weight of this geographical settling. Hebrew uses different verb stems to change the voice or the cause of a root word.
Okay, lay some grammar on us.
When we look at the passive form, what grammarians call the nufl stem, we see yashab used in a fascinating way. It is used for cities, lands, or even ruins being inhabited.
Being inhabited, so the land is receiving the action.
Yes. Exodus 16.35 talks about the Israelites coming to the border of an inhabited land. Jeremiah 22.6 contains a severe warning to the king of Judah, where God says, "He will make the palace a wilderness, a city not inhabited."
Oh, wow.
The ancient mind viewed the land as a participant in the action. An empty land is desolate. It is waiting for someone to sit on it. A populated land is experiencing the state of being sat upon.
I love how visceral that is. The land is either empty or it is holding the weight of a population.
Yeah.
But what happens when a king or a conqueror gets involved? Because rulers are always moving populations around in the ancient world.
All the time.
They conquer a city, exile the residents, and bring in new people.
Yeah.
How does the verb handle that kind of forced migration?
That brings us to the causative form of the verb, known as the he fill stem. This is when a subject causes an object to perform the action. So a king causes a population to dwell somewhere.
Okay, so causing someone to sit.
Yes, Isaiah 54.3 speaks of the future restoration of Israel, saying her descendants will dispossess the nations and populate the desolate cities, literally causing them to be inhabited.
Ah, I see.
Or consider a more peaceful example in Genesis 47.10. Joseph is the second most powerful man in Egypt, and his family comes down to escape the famine. The text says Joseph settled his father and his brothers in Egypt and gave them a possession in the land of Ramesses.
He caused them to yashab.
Spot on. He used his political leverage to give them a place to sit, to remain, to plant themselves permanently in foreign soil.
You know, if you are listening to this on a walk through your neighborhood, think about the houses around you. In our modern context, we view residency through the lens of paperwork.
Mortgages, deeds, things like that.
Right. You have a deed, a title, a lease agreement. Your name is in a digital database at the county clerk's office. But to the ancient mind, residency was intimately tied to the physical body.
Very tangible.
Extremely tangible. To dwell in a place wasn't simply to have legal rights to it. It meant planting your physical body firmly, taking a seat in the land, and remaining there. You could not separate the inhabitant from the act of occupying the space. It is a very embodied flesh and blood way of looking at what it means to be home.
The physical presence validates the claim. If you are not sitting in the land, you do not truly inhabit it. This concept becomes incredibly significant later in Israel's history when they are exiled to Babylon.
Oh, because they were removed from their seat.
Yes, they are forced to stand up and walk away from the land God gave them. The tragedy of the exile is the loss of Yashav.
Man, language is a messy thing, isn't it? Whenever you have a word that is used over 1,000 times, people start bending it.
They do. They stretch it to fit new scenarios.
Right, they start applying it to situations that have nothing to do with chairs or thrones or geography. We do this in English all the time. We say we are sitting on a piece of information or an idea is sitting well with us.
Idioms are fascinating.
They are. So since yasha means to sit and stay, how did the ancient Hebrews use it in unconventional ways? What are the strange idioms hiding in this lexical data?
The text reveals some incredibly vivid idioms. For example, Psalm 17.3 and Judges 16.9 use yashab to describe predators or enemies.
Wait, sitting predators?
Yeah, the psalmist compares his enemies to a lion eager to tear its prey, a young lion lurking in ambush. The word used for lurking is yashab.
So a lion sits in the tall grass waiting to strike. That paints a terrifying picture. It is not resting, it is coiled tension.
Precisely. It is a seated posture, but it is loaded with malicious intent. It is the stillness before violence. We see the exact same usage in Judges 16 with the story of Samson and Delilah.
Oh, when she cuts his hair.
Well, right before that, Delilah has men hidden in her room waiting to jump Samson when she ties him up. The text literally says the ambushers were sitting in the inner room. The stillness of the ambush is captured by the verb.
That is so descriptive. Are there any other weird usages?
Another fascinating idiom appears in Exodus 21.19 and Jeremiah 8.14, where the word describes forced idleness or sheer laziness.
Like someone refusing to get off the couch?
Yes, it is the negative side of sitting.
Mm-hmm.
In Exodus 21, the law discusses a situation where two men fight and one is injured and confined to his bed. The person who injured him has to pay for his loss of time. Literally, his time spent sitting.
Oh, because he can't work.
Right. In Jeremiah 8, the prophet mocks the people who are facing imminent invasion from Babylon. He says, "Why are we sitting still? Gather together, let us go into the fortified cities and perish there."
So the sitting there implies a failure to act, a paralysis in the face of doom.
That's right.
Okay, I have to bring up a detail from the research notes here because it is just too good to ignore. We have talked about lions hiding and people being paralyzed by fear, but there is an idiom in Deuteronomy 23.14 that is incredibly practical.
Oh, I know the one you are talking about.
The verse uses the phrase sitting down outside. And according to the historical context, this is the biblical euphemism for performing a bodily necessity.
Yes.
Going to the bathroom in the ancient military camp is literally called sitting down outside.
It is a great example of how a mundane physical action becomes a polite cultural idiom. The context of Deuteronomy 23 is maintaining the ritual purity of the military camp.
Right, because it's a holy war context.
Yes, the law requires soldiers to have a designated place outside the camp to relieve themselves, and they are required to carry a small trowel with their weapons to dig a hole and cover it up. The reasoning given in the text is that God walks in the midst of the camp to deliver them, so the camp must be holy.
You cannot have raw sewage in the same space where the holy God is dwelling. So the act of leaving the camp and taking care of business is euphemistically referred to as taking a seat outside. That makes perfect sense.
It's very polite.
But there is another oddity in the research that I'm still trying to wrap my head around. It involves the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, and it goes back to that causative stem, the hufil form, where you are causing someone to sit.
This is one of the most significant linguistic anomalies in the latter part of the Old Testament. In the books of Ezra chapter 10 and Nehemiah chapter 13, the leadership of Israel is dealing with a massive crisis.
This is post-exile, right?
Yes, the people have returned from the Babylonian exile. They are trying to rebuild Jerusalem, and the men have been marrying foreign women from the surrounding pagan nations. Ezra and Nehemiah are furious about this because it threatens the covenant fidelity of the restored community.
Okay.
And the specific verb they use to describe the act of marrying these foreign women is the hifil stem of yashab.
Wait, hold on. This is where you lose me. How does causing someone to sit down equate to marrying them? If a man takes a wife, why does the text say he caused her to sit?
To our modern ears, it sounds completely bizarre. We think of marriage in terms of romance, vows, and walking down an aisle. But you have to look at the economic and structural realities of the ancient world. Psalm 113.9 provides the key to unlocking this.
What does that psalm say?
That psalm praises God, saying, He gives a barren woman a home, making her the joyous mother of children. The Hebrew text literally says God causes the barren woman to sit in the house. He causes her to yashab.
Oh.
In ancient Israel, marrying someone was synonymous with bringing them into your physical domicile and establishing them as the center of a new household.
Oh, I see. It is not about the wedding ceremony. It is about the domestic reality that follows. When you marry a woman, you are bringing her into your tent or your stone house, and you are saying, you are now seated here. You are the matriarch of this space.
Yes. You are causing a new family unit to take up physical space in the community.
The linguistics reflect the sociology.
They really do. In fact, scholars point out that in Ethiopian, a language related to Hebrew, the cognate word for yashab explicitly means to marry or consummate a marriage. Bringing a wife into the home is causing her to dwell there.
That makes total sense now.
When Ezra and Nehemiah condemn the men of Jerusalem, they are not just upset about a piece of paper. They are upset because these men have caused idolatrous women to take a permanent seat in the holy city. They have established households that are fundamentally compromised.
So the sitting implies permanence.
Yes, and that permanence is exactly what Ezra is trying to tear down to protect the community.
That paints such a vivid picture of what marriage meant in that culture. It is the geographic establishment of a new family. Okay, so far we've talked about human beings.
Right. Lots of human actions.
We have talked about Isaac sitting on a bed, Moses on a rock, Solomon on a throne. We've talked about nomads sitting in a new land, lions sitting in ambush, and husbands causing their wives to sit in a new house. But the entire second half of our research stack shifts the focus away from humanity.
It scales way up.
I want to scale this up. If Yasha establishes a human ruler's authority on earth, what happens when the subject of the verb is God?
The shift in scale changes everything. When human beings sit, there is always a sense of vulnerability. Moses sits because he is weak.
True.
Kings sit on thrones, but they can be overthrown, like Adonijah was.
Yeah.
Human sitting is temporary. But the Psalms analyze God's posture in a radically different light. Psalm 2.4 says, He who sits in the heavens laughs, the Lord holds them in derision.
Wow.
Psalm 9.8 says, He sits enthroned forever, having established his throne for justice. Psalm 29.9 gives us an incredible image. The Lord sits enthroned over the flood. The Lord sits enthroned as king forever. And in 1 Samuel 4.4, the Ark of the Covenant is associated with the title, the Lord of Hosts who sits on the cherubim.
The one who sits on the cherubim. Those are the angelic beings over the mercy seat on the ark. That is a striking visual. But let's dig into the theology of this. From a Reformed perspective, what does it mean that God's default posture is described as sitting? Because he is not exhausted like Moses. He is not taking a break.
Not at all. In Reformed theology, God's seated posture is the ultimate expression of his absolute sovereignty and his eternal decrees.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
When God sits, It means the work of ruling is active, ongoing, and entirely unthreatened. He does not need to stand up to defend his kingdom. He does not pace the floors of heaven wondering how human history is going to play out. His sitting implies that all things are governed by his sovereign will, and nothing can move him from that place of authority. The decrees are secure.
I think of the difference between a battlefield general and a triumphant king.
Let's hear it.
A general who is out in the field pacing his command tent is anxious. He is waiting for runners to bring reports from the front line. He is adjusting his strategy based on what the enemy is doing. He is standing, reacting, calculating.
He is stressed.
Yeah, highly stressed. But a king who takes his seat on the throne back in the capital, he already knows the war is won, the enemies are vanquished, the treaties are signed.
He is at rest.
Right. God's yashab is the posture of supreme victory. He is not reacting to human rebellion. Psalm 2 says the kings of the earth set themselves against him, and his response is simply to sit in the heavens and laugh. The sheer disparity in authority is captured in his seated posture.
That captures the dynamic perfectly. God's authority is unassailable, and the vocabulary of the biblical text reinforces this permanent, unshakable rule. We find several nouns derived from the root yasha that describe the architecture of his reign.
What kind of nouns?
Well, there is the word moshab, which means a dwelling place or a seat of assembly. We see this in the Psalms describing the heavens. There's also the word makon, which means a fixed place or a place of enthronement, famously used in Exodus 15:17, when Moses sings about the sanctuary God's hands had established.
So these nouns point to a physical or at least structural reality of his rule.
Yes, these nouns solidify the idea that heaven is the literal seat of divine government. It is the command center of the universe, and the seat is occupied permanently by a God who never slumbers, never tires, and never abdicates.
So we have this massive, majestic, almost terrifying picture of God permanently seated in the highest heavens, completely sovereign over all of space and time. But our source material introduces a massive linguistic rivalry right at this point.
It does. There's another word we have to look at.
Right, the Hebrew root shikan. This word also gets translated as settling or dwelling, but it is only used 111 times in the Old Testament, compared to the 1,000 plus uses of yashab. If both words mean to dwell or settle, how do they differ? And why does the biblical text switch between them?
The root shuken is absolutely central to understanding how God interacts with humanity. It is the linguistic basis for the noun mishad, which is the word for the physical tabernacle, the tent of meeting where God met with the Israelites in the wilderness.
The actual tent.
Yes. The texts reveal a stark contrast between these two verbs. While yashav implies a permanent, sovereign, unmoving throne in the heavens, shaken is used to describe God's condescending, localized presence among his people on earth.
So it's a different kind of presence.
Completely. For example, in Exodus 40, when the tabernacle is finally finished, the text says, "The cloud of the Lord covered the tent, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle." The cloud rested or tabernacled there. The verb is shaken.
Wait, let me stop you, because this introduces a massive theological problem. If God is permanently stuck to a throne in heaven, which is the entire point of Yashav and his unchangeable decrees, how can he also be wandering around the desert in a litter tent with a bunch of nomads?
It sounds like a contradiction.
It does! Those two ideas seem to completely contradict each other. You cannot be permanently seated in the high heavens and simultaneously moving through the Sinai Peninsula. How does the ancient mind reconcile his omnipresence and his localized presence?
That is the exact tension the biblical authors navigated, and they use grammar to solve it. When you get to the book of Deuteronomy, Moses is preparing the people to enter the Promised Land. He talks about a central sanctuary they will build one day.
Okay, the future temple.
Right. And the text uses a specific grammatical form of sheken, the peel stem. This stem is intensive. Deuteronomy repeatedly describes God causing his name to dwell at the sanctuary. The text separates God's transcendent being from his localized presence.
Oh, his name.
Yes. Later rabbinic traditions built on this exact vocabulary, developing the word ikina, the Shekinah glory, to describe this phenomenon.
Causing his name to dwell. So he's not packing his bags, leaving his heavenly throne and moving into a tent. He is projecting his presence.
Spot on. The theological synthesis is brilliant. God's transcendent, infinite being stays enthroned over the cosmos. That is his yashab. He rules the universe from a posture of absolute authority.
But he doesn't just stay far away.
No, out of sheer grace, his manifest presence, his glory, his name, descends to stay with his people in the dirt and the dust. That is his shaken. The biblical text preserves his absolute sovereignty while making room for an intense, intimate proximity to the Israelites.
That is beautiful.
He can be the God who holds the galaxies together while simultaneously being the God who leads a pillar of fire through the desert night.
If you really think about that, it changes how you view God entirely. We tend to pick one or the other. We either want a God who is a cosmic clockmaker sitting far away in the heavens, running the universe through cold decrees.
Right, the distant deity.
Or we want a buddy God, someone who is just hanging out with us in our tents, completely relatable, but lacking any real authority over the storms. But these two Hebrew verbs, yashab and shaken, hold those two extremes together in perfect tension.
They really do.
It shows a God who is entirely sovereign over the cosmos, permanently seated in authority, yet willing to pitch a tent in the dirt to be near a wandering, rebellious people. He is transcendent, yet deeply well. He is immanent.
It is a dynamic linguistic relationship that perfectly mirrors the mechanics of the covenant. Yashab represents the eternal reality of who God is in himself. Yashan represents the historical manifestation of his grace toward us.
What a striking way to look at it. Okay, let's look back at the ground we have covered today. We started with the very basic physical mechanics of a human body bending its knees and sitting down, looking at how Isaac and Moses experienced physical rest.
Then we move to the geographic reality of nomads finally inhabiting a land, building houses, and causing their families to settle.
Yes, and we unpack the strange idioms of lions in ambush, lazy soldiers, military sanitation, and the causative mechanics of an ancient marriage. And finally, we looked at the massive theological contrast between the sovereign internal enthronement of God in the heavens versus his localized tabernacling among his people on earth.
The scope of how one verb expands to cover all of human experience and divine revelation is incredible. But there is one last noun derived from these roots that ties everything together, and it flips the script on how we are supposed to view ourselves. The word is toshab.
Toshab. What is the context for that word?
It translates to sojourner, or temporary resident. We find it right in the middle of the legal codes in Leviticus 25. This is the chapter detailing the year of Jubilee, where land is returned to its original owners and debts are forgiven.
Oh, the big reset year.
Yes. God is laying out the economic laws for the land of Israel, and he makes a stunning declaration. He says, "The land shall not be sold permanently, for the land is mine, for you are strangers and sojourners with me." The word for sojourner is tosheb.
Wait, so they don't even own the land?
The theological point is that God owns the land. He is the ultimate landowner. He sits securely forever. Humans, however, even when they build stone houses, plant vineyards, and inhabit the land for generations, are merely, they are tosheb, temporary guests in God's domain.
So earlier we used the analogy of a corporate boardroom or a king taking his throne. But this introduces a completely different analogy. It is the difference between owning a permanent estate and checking into a hotel.
Oh, that is a good way to look at it.
A hotel room might be incredibly comfortable. You might unpack your bags, put your clothes in the dresser, and sleep in the bed. But you do not own the room. You are passing through. The management owns the building.
That is the exact reality Leviticus is trying to instill in the people. Even though they have transitioned from tents to houses, their posture before God must remain that of a dependent guest.
Because they forget.
When we forget that we are temporary residents, we start acting like we're the ones permanently seated on the throne. We start trying to secure our own eternity through property, wealth, or human authority. But the text continually points back to the fact that God alone possesses the eternal yashab.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. You have heard how these ancient writers viewed the physical act of sitting, dwelling, and ruling. If God is the ultimate permanent dweller, the true yashab, and you are designed as a temporary resident, a toshab, in this current age, how should that reality alter the way you live?
It should alter everything.
It really should. Look around at your physical home, your bank accounts, your career, your earthly security. We spend so much energy trying to build permanent kingdoms for ourselves. We want to sit on our own little thrones. But if God is the only one truly seated in the heavens, holding the decrees of human history in his hands, maybe our goal isn't to build a better throne. Maybe our goal is to find rest in the fact that the true king is already seated, the war's already won, and we are just passing through his house.